this. I totally admit it. So I'm going to cut my mic.
Okay.
And I'm going to cut my camera.
And it's nice talking to you.
Thanks, Ellen. Hey, John, we are excited to talk to you, and we hope that you'll pass some info on to some others. This is good for us, too, because we're kind of new at presenting online, so you can tell us how we did at the end. My name's Diane Salucci, and this is Barbara Bartocci.
You can tell we're Irish.
Bartocci and Salucci here. And basically, I'm here to represent the Senior Learning Network, and at the same time, I'm also working on some memoir ideas of my own. I've done more corporate writing in my life, and I'm trying to now kind of switch over to do more personal writing. So, but Barbara is really a national author, writer, presenter. She's given workshops all over the country on memoir writing. She also has been the author of 9 books, including 2 memoirs, has won awards. She's written personal stories for many women's magazines, including Reader's Digest, and she's contributed to Chicken Soup for the Soul. So she's been out there, and normally she will give like a 3-hour workshop on how to write your memoir. So today we're just kind of winnowing it down to the key points. And so we'll give a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation, but feel free to interrupt at any time and say, wait a minute, I have a question. She'll stop from time to time and have you write something and think about some things. So I just want you to know it's very interactive. Even though we're going to be doing some talking on this end, we will be asking questions. And at the end, we'll leave some time for you to ask any questions you have. Does that sound good?
Yes.
Okay, great. Then I am going to turn it over to Barbara Bartocci.
Hey, John, I am happy to meet you.
Yeah,
and
here.
I love giving this workshop because I don't know about you, but I know more than once I have said to myself, oh, I'm so sorry I didn't ask my mom or my dad some of the questions, that now it's too late. They're gone. And what I've noticed as I've been giving these memoir writing workshops is how many people, once you hit 50, 60, and beyond, suddenly you're very interested in sharing your story with your grandkids, your kids, maybe with others that you know. But you may decide, okay, I want to share my story. Then there is that big pause. How do I do it? How do I get started? And that's what I enjoy about this workshop. So first of all, John, Diane, would you hit the first PowerPoint? Oops. Okay, so this is what we're going to be talking about, how you could write your own story, John. And then Diane, if you'll hit the next one. I do want to just remind you that we're going to be talking about a memoir, not an autobiography. An autobiography is the history of your life. It starts with when you were born, where you were born, and it goes on to the end, literally the end. But the memoir is a slice of your life. And not only do you focus on one part of your life, but you also reflect on what it is you learned from that experience. Now, I have known people, John, who have written a series of short essays, short memoirs that they have been then put together as an entire book. And then I've known people who wanted to write a memoir in book length. But today we're going to talk mostly about writing a shorter memoir, okay? Now, Diane, would you hit this again? John, I've given a lot of workshops around the country to business writers, to technical writers, to creative writers, and to memoir writers. And I always tell them the very first question to ask is, who is your reader? Can you tell me why that is such an important question? Do you have a thought on that?
It's okay. So you have some idea who you're writing to? That makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It's going to be interested in what you're writing.
Good. Very good. And you know, John, knowing who your reader is will let you know what information to put in and what information you can leave out. I call it writing a letter to Aunt Gladys. I have an aunt named Gladys, and if I send her a letter, I know there are some things she really wants to learn about what's going on in our family, but there are other things she could care less about. So that helps me construct what it is I'm going to say. Also, knowing who your reader is, this will help you figure out the tone that you want to take. Do you want to be humorous? Do you want to be serious? Do you want to be casual? Most people who are writing memoirs are going to write in a voice that is very much like the voice you use when you're talking. And at the same time, knowing who your reader is will help you make that memoir really applicable to who's going to read it. And I would like you also to keep in mind, as you ask, who is my reader, try writing down on paper a quick little biography of the key readers that you know you're going to have, because this will keep you focused on them as you write the rest of your memoir. Okay, Diane, would you hit the next?
Here you go.
Oh, okay. So, how do we figure out what slice of life we want to write about? Well, here are some questions to help you start. What challenges have you overcome? Every one of us in life, if we hit 50 and above, we have come to challenges that we have taken. I recently had a story, John, I think, can you see this? This appeared in Chicken Soup for the Soul, Stepping Outside of Your Comfort Zone. And the story I told was overcoming the challenge of going down a black diamond ski slope. I don't know if you ski, but the black diamond is the hardest. And I've always said, I can't do those. I don't like ledges with edges. But I took a 4-day class, and when I managed to go down that black diamond, I didn't do it with much grace. However, what it made me realize is, by gosh, if I can go down a black diamond ski slope and overcome my fear at that, well, I can overcome the difficulties that come along when you have a midlife divorce, which I was going through at the time. So one of the things about looking at our challenges and how we overcame them is that we realize, if I'm able to do this over here, by gosh, I can do that over there. But it's not just challenges. You know, John, you might want to think about a happy memory from childhood, a particular Christmas perhaps, or a birthday, or maybe the day that you got to sit at the cool table in junior high. Or you might want to think about what unusual experiences you have had. I'll tell you one of mine. When I was 8 years old, in 1948, I went with my mom and my brother on a plane. Believe me, that plane only went 4,000 feet high. Isn't that amazing? Today we go 30,000 without thinking about it. We went to mainland China because my dad was an Air Force officer who had just been stationed over there. Well, China was in the heart of the they were in the heart of a civil war. And so we were only there about 4 or 5 months, and they had to evacuate us from China, from Shanghai, over to Yokohama, Japan. That was a pretty interesting, unusual experience for a kid. And it led me to write my very first published story from my own life, which brought me fame and fortune. When I was 11 years old, I wrote about this experience, and the fortune came from the year's free subscription to the magazine, which was titled Children's Playmate. And the fame came from the kids who wrote me letters wanting to be my pen pal. So, John, I'm quite sure you've had probably a number of unusual experiences. And I always tell people, keep in mind that something that might seem quite ordinary to you might seem very unusual to, let's say, your grandchildren. For instance, if you grew up in western Kansas on a farm, but you've got grandchildren who lived in the East Coast because your daughter married a man who moved to the East Coast, for them, life on the farm might seem extremely unusual, even though for you, it seems very ordinary. Another question you might ask, who influenced your life? How did it happen? Why was this person so much of an influence? Who might it be? Maybe it was your grandmother. Maybe a particular teacher. Maybe a coach. Or even a pet. John, I once wrote a story for Reader's Digest about my youngest son's pet snake. And that pet snake, believe it or not, the story I wrote made you love this snake. This snake made a real difference in my son's life when he was in seventh grade. And not too many people really like snakes, but I was very proud of the writing because I think I made it, I helped the reader to know why this snake influenced my son's life. And then another question, what's special about where you grew up or when you grew up? John, may I ask you, what decade are you in right now?
Are you under my age?
Yeah,
Yes.
which decade?
I am 69.
Okay,
Okay.
all right. So if you're 69 now, let's see, were you a teenager in the 60s?
Yes.
Okay, so the 60s were a really unusual historical part of our country's history, and that was very special about a time in which you grew up. You might have a certain ethnic or religious heritage that is something you would like to share. Maybe you want to take another nostalgic look at a time or place in which you grew up. Someone who came to one of my workshops, he was a retired principal from a school, and he wanted to write a book-length piece, a memoir, about growing up in a little town in western Kansas. And he knew who his reader was, and so he made it kind of a humorous look at growing up in western Kansas, and it was a wonderful, wonderful story. So these are some questions that can start you thinking. Okay, let's go to the next one, Diane. John, I hope you will write this down because this is a really important question. What event or aha moment ended the life you were living before and changed your entire life's direction? Was there an event or some kind of a moment, a transformational moment that caused you to change the direction of your life?
And there may have been more than one, right?
Oh, I think most people, by the time we get over 50, have had more than one. I know that mine came when I was 29, and I had married young. I was 19. I married a young naval officer who became a fighter pilot. And he was flying in the Vietnam War, and unfortunately, he went out on a combat mission and he never came back. His plane was lost at sea. He was lost at sea. We had 3 little children. And believe me, my life totally changed. My daughter has said that when she thinks of her life, before her daddy's death, it seems in Technicolor in her mind. And then after her father's death, for a long time, it seemed to exist in black and white. So what was an event or a transformational moment you might have had? Diane, did you have any?
I had several.
Well, tell us one.
I'll tell you one that'll give you an example of what we're talking about in terms of memoir. Sometimes you can find an event or something that happened to you in childhood or even as an adult that really represents some message about your life that was very influential. So mine happened when I was 7 years old. I had been born in and grown up in Detroit at that point. And my father got a transfer to another Ford plant in Ohio. And he decided to move his family to a very small town, thought that would be better for us. And I was going to first grade, my first day of school, my new dress and my new shoes, and I'm all excited. Used to the big city, so this was new for me, this little town. And I come home, my parents had just moved us into a little house, the picket fence, the whole thing, just had blacktopped our driveway. And when I come home from school, I see my parents standing at the end of the driveway, and my mother's crying, and my father is comforting her, and they're looking at the driveway. And I come running up, and I see these big white letters on our black driveway. I didn't know what it meant at the time, but the letters said, "Go home, Dagos." So that would be an incident that I could start a story with. And just in that incident, you as the reader would know ruh-roh. These people had some problems in this town because in those days, and I was also a teenager in the 60s, in those days in a small town, being Italian was too much for these people. So it informed a lot of my upbringing, a lot of my experiences in school, a lot of my father's drive to make us achieve. So you can see that just in that one incident, I could take off into what that meant for my childhood and what that then drove me to later in life. So
that's an excellent example. And John, I imagine you're thinking of some things right now that are going through your head. And again, I really encourage you to jot this down so that afterwards, after this workshop, you can do some thinking about it. Diane, get the next
I will
slide.
do that just for you.
Okay, so we're asking the question, what slice of my life do I want to write about first? And I've had people say to me, well, why would I need to research? It's all there in my memories, isn't it? I mean, it's all about me. But in fact, it's not all about you, because all of us live in, I call them silos, where we're in like a tunnel. And I'm very aware of what's going on in my life, but I'm not so aware of what's going on in the wider world around me. And this is where I say, God bless Google, because we don't have to go to libraries. We don't have to find microfiche newspapers anymore. We just have to ask Google on our computers and we can get information. But one of the best ways to research past lives or past memories is to look at old letters. Now, John, I don't know about you, but when my husband was a naval officer and headed out to Westpac on a 6 or 7 month cruise, he wrote a lot of letters to me, and I wrote every night back to him. And now we've got these letters in the big box. My daughter is keeping them. And she said, oh, they give such a good story, such a good idea of what it was like to be a young military couple in the 60s and the 70s. Well, not the 70s because he died in 68. But old letters, old photos. And you know, I have to say, it makes me kind of sad today in a way because we do emails. And unless you print out your emails, we're not going to have any of those old letters that we used to depend on. Well, another good research tool, of course, is to look at old photo albums, old scrapbooks. Do you have some photo albums, John? Do you have any scrapbooks around?
Yes, I do.
It's always fun to look at those photos, especially
Yes.
the ones that are 15, 20 years old. And usually I say, oh my gosh, did I really wear my hair like that? Did I really wear those big glasses? Oh, was I really that thin? Hey, that's cool. And then another way to research is to interview other people, especially maybe people who were around and knew your parents when they were young, or interview your siblings. One thing I have learned is that if we take any particular time in our family life, let's say a particular Christmas, and I ask my 2 brothers, how do you remember that Christmas? Their memories will be very different from mine. I still remember when my daughter said to me one time, oh, Mom, we lived in that house. We rented that house for a year, and it was so hot and so muggy. And I said, really? I don't remember that. And she said, Mom, that's because there was one air conditioner. It was in a window in the master bedroom. So her memory and my memory were very different. So I really encourage you, if you're going to write a book that has to do with family members, that you actually interview some of them. And I don't have it up here, but you know, it's a wonderful way if we can go to the place where we were born, where we grew up, go to that particular place and actually walk around and just experience what it feels like. John, have you done any thinking yet about what slice of your life you would like to write about?
Not really, I guess, no.
Okay, that's okay. That's what this workshop is all about. It's designed to give you some ideas of how to go back into those memories. Diane, how about another slide? Okay, where do we start our story? Well, fiction writers talk about an inciting incident, but it's just as true of a memoir as it is of fiction. And the inciting incident is where your life changes. Something I learned in this from a business magazine some years ago. All of us are living right now in our comfort zone. We're in the status quo. We may not even like it that much. Maybe I don't like my job that much. My goodness, I might not like my marriage that much. But I do feel comfortable because I know what to expect. And that's why it's hard for most people to take that leap into the unknown, to take that leap into change. So what often happens is change comes to us, like it or not. And how we deal with that change, how we deal with the crisis, becomes the story that we're going to tell along with what we learned from that. For instance, you might come to a place where you would say, well, I can't say that it was easy losing my job. I wouldn't want it to happen again, but my gosh, I sure learned a lot from the experience. We come back to another place of comfort, another status quo. Now, that may be where you want to start your story, at the beginning, or you may want to start at the crisis point. At the crisis point where you thought all was lost, you weren't sure how you would manage this, then using a flashback, you tell your reader how you got to that crisis, and then, of course, what you did to finish with that crisis and to make it successful. Diane, do you want to add anything here? You look like you do.
No, I was just saying I've had
Okay.
many crisis points in my life. So, yeah, I remember telling a friend one time, I also went through a horrific divorce, like many of us did. And I remember the moment that I realized that something was wrong in my marriage. I remember that I had my hand on a doorknob and I was just about to leave, but something stopped me from leaving. And at that moment, I heard my husband on the phone, and that phone call changed my life. So that moment, the crisis point of just having my hand on that doorknob and knowing that my life has just changed.
And then you would go back
And say,
you
what
would,
led up to this?
Yes, yeah, okay. So, Diane, let's have another PowerPoint. So, you've decided where you're going to start your memoir, John. Now you have to think about who shares the stage with you. Because unless you're writing about what it was like to be a hermit on a mountain for 20 years, there are going to be other people in your story. And I always like to tell people, it's not enough to just say, yeah, I know I'm going to write, I'm going to include a couple of my siblings, or I'm going to include my best friend, or I'm going to include this teacher that made such an influential mark in my life. I encourage people to actually write down on paper who else is going to be in your memoir, and actually write a little quick bio of that person. What's that person look like? How old was the person when that individual was sharing the stage with you? So that you're very clear about not only yourself, but about the others who are part of your story. All right, Diane.
And I can say that I had a friend who wrote a memoir about her Italian family, and some of them were gone. So she got pictures of each of these characters, each of these people from her family, and she put them up on a little ledge in her writing room. And as she was writing, she kept looking at them and asking them to talk to her, while she wrote.
Diane, that is an excellent thing to suggest doing.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
talk to pictures.
That comes back to what I call writing the letter to Aunt Gladys.
Right.
When you see that person, when you picture that person who's going to be your reader, it makes it easier to write the story, to write what you want to share with the reader. Let's have another PowerPoint. Okay, so you figure out where your story begins, and then of course you have to figure out where your story ends. John, I don't know about you, when I have on occasion read a novel, seemed to be going along just fine, and then it was as if the writer couldn't figure out how to end it, and so it just stops, and it leaves me. I'm not happy with it because it just stops. So it's important for us to think about what is the final scene in the story I'm going to write, to actually think about it. The author of The World According to Garp, who was John Irving, he said in an interview that he always pictured the final scene of his novel before he began to actually write it down. I don't think that's always necessary because sometimes it's in the actual writing that you come to see what the final scene is. But at some point, we need to picture where do we want the story to end. And then this is so important in a memoir. What is it you learned from the experience? When I was writing for the large magazines, the editors would say to me, Barbara, you need to think about what is the takeaway for the reader. Because I wrote a lot of essays, a lot of stories, personal narratives, and in all of them, there had to be something that the reader could say, well, my experience isn't exactly like hers, but she's telling me something that I can take and put into a part of my life, and I can learn from this. And my brother, my younger brother, is just now having his first two grandchildren have just come on the scene. And so he's told me just recently, he's already starting to write down stories from his life so that he can put them into the book to give them grandpa's wisdom. So if you've got some grandkids, you probably have some wisdom to hand to them as well. Diane, next. So, all right, John, so here we are. We've done our planning. We've asked the questions. We've come to that place where we know the slice of life that we're going to write about. We've thought about where to start. We've thought about where to end, who's on stage with us. We've done our research. We've gone to Google. Now comes the challenging part because you're going to sit down at your computer. You use a computer, John?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Well, because a lot of people prefer to write on paper with a pen for their first draft. So it's not necessary to write on a computer. But whether you got a piece of paper in front of you or a screen in front of you, there is one thing that is true. They are both blank. And there is nothing harder, and it doesn't matter how many stories, how much writing you do, and I've done a lot. Looking at that blank computer screen is always makes my heart beat faster. How do you jumpstart your writing? One writer gave this quote in an interview. He said, hey, writing is not so hard. All you do is sit at your computer and you wait for the drops of blood to form on your forehead. Well, these four items right here are techniques, tools that I have used and many people have used, but I know they work because I use them all the time. The first tool is called clustering or mind mapping. Some people think of it as that. If you ever had a 5th or 6th grade kid who came home from school, she or he might have talked about clustering because it's a tool that teachers use also. And it's very simple. I love things that are simple to use. All you do is take a piece of paper, and in the middle of the paper, you write your topic. So we're going to make this real easy. We're going to say, your topic is my childhood. You've written that on the middle of the paper, circle it, and now what you're going to do, this is like a brainstorming session with yourself. What you're going to do as fast as you can is jot down everything that comes into your mind, circle your cluster around your topic, everything that comes into your mind about your childhood. You do that for a couple of minutes until you're not thinking of anything more, and then you stop.
They're almost like little thought bubbles, you know, if you think about a bubble out of somebody's head. So there'd be like all these bubbles coming out of the center.
Yes, very, very good one. I think of it also as a bunch of balloons tied with a string to the very center, but you're clustering. And the reason why this works better than writing the topic down and then trying for a linear outline, John, is because of the way our brains work. The creative side of our brain works with circularity, it's a hard word to say, not with a linear list. So when we want to really be brainstorming, we need to do it in a circular way. It works better. All right, the second tool, and I use this all the time, is timed free writing. Here's the problem for most of us. We just want our writing to be perfect. You know, you're writing down your memoir, you know your kids are going to see it or your grandkids, and by gosh, you want it to be perfect. You want it to be really good. But what happens when we want that perfection, particularly on the very first draft, is it gives us writer's block. And suddenly we can't think of any way to get started. So what I do with time-to-free writing is this. I set my smartphone or, God, I can even use the kitchen timer, the oven timer. But I use a timer and I set it for a particular amount of time. And I encourage you to think of 10 minutes. That's a good amount of time, 10 minutes. And then you are going to sit down and you're going to start writing. And this is your goal. It's your only goal. You are going to write without stopping for those 10 minutes. It doesn't matter if you got the right grammar. It doesn't matter if you're spelling right. It doesn't matter if you got complete sentences. Nothing matters but that you write without stopping. And if you write for 3 or 4 minutes and suddenly you can't think of anything to say, what you do, John, is you write, I can't think of anything to say. Believe me, by the time you write that twice, I can't think of anything to say, you will think of something more to say. When we finish the free writing, I encourage people to read it out loud because here's something that's very special. Most of us are actually better writers than we realize. What gets in our way is that we're trying to be perfect the very first moment out of the gate. But when you're writing without trying to be perfect, when you're doing that time-free writing, as you read it out loud, you may be happily surprised at how good it sounds. But this is just a tool for you to use to get started. This is not what your reader is going to read. So some of the time-free writing you want to keep, some of it you want to get rid of. But now it's like having a bunch of clay that you can mold. Now you don't have an empty computer screen or an empty piece of paper. Now you've got a beginning. All right, I'm going to tell you another tool that I have also used. Some people like it. I don't always use it with the time-to-free writing, but it is useful, and I know it does work. And that is you get a group of Post-its, and you think about your topic, just as you did before you started clustering, and then you write one fact or one point that you want to make, one to each Post-it. So let's say you have 20, and then you find yourself a good big piece of wall, and you stick those Post-its up on that wall. And as you read them, you may look at the one that you put up as number 20 at the very end, and you may say, oh, wait, this really begins up at the beginning. And you can move the Post-its around, and it's much easier than trying to make an outline in a computer and then shift. So that's another way you can jumpstart your writing. Now I've got to take a drink of water. So just a minute.
That's because you need a break before you write every day for 10 minutes. Is that right?
Yes, it is. John, do you have any questions that you want to ask right now?
There are some things that I see on the internet. I might be getting some emails. I don't know right now, but they say they can help you. There's people, there's companies that can help you write. And so they want to get you to help you get you started or help you write. Is that anything like what I'd be interested in to help me to write?
Well, there are many, many, many blogs and websites that deal with writing and that deal with memoir writing. So yes, I certainly encourage you to go and take a look. Some of them will have information that you can use for free. Some of them may want to charge you, but I would be very careful before I pay to have someone help me with my writing. I'd first see about doing it yourself, because there is something about the act of writing that allows you to come to understand yourself more. There's a benefit, even if no one else ever read it, there would be a benefit in some of the writing you would do from your own life. Well, the last time I gave this workshop for 6 weeks, I gave it to a group of people in where I live in Overland Park. And we met once a week for 6 weeks. And I gave them a little homework assignment. I said, here's what I want you to do. Every morning, get up and try to do it at the same time every day. And for just 10 minutes, write something that you remember from your life. It doesn't have to be what you're planning for your memoir. It doesn't have to be anything, but just something that pops into your head at that moment, and you write about it for 10 minutes. John, I don't know if you do a lot of exercising. I love to work out. Diane, I think you
I wouldn't say I love it, but I do.
but you do it. Okay. Well, I happen to like water aerobics, and sometimes I go to the fitness center and use the machines. But this is what I've learned. If I have built up my muscles and I am doing a certain amount of exercise, and then I go away on a trip for 2 weeks, and I come back and I go back to exercising, am I going to start at the same place I left off? No,
Okay.
no. So writing is a lot like doing exercise. And when we do it each day, we just have to do a little bit of it. And we will build up our writing muscles, so to speak.
All
So
right.
I encourage people to write 10 minutes a day. You can make a file on your computer, just put it in memories. And each day, write for 10 minutes, some memory that comes into your mind at that time. And do it 5 days a week. I always say take the weekends off. But as you do that, you will discover that writing becomes easier and easier because you are building up your muscles. Okay?
And also, John, if you have a situation where the actual process of writing is intimidating, sometimes it's helped me to do one of those voice to text programs on your computer, and I will just talk to my computer and tell my computer a memory so that I have something to start with. So then it comes up on my computer in type, and I can read it, and I go, oh, there's a place to start.
Hey,
So,
that's a very
some
good
people are
point.
better
Yeah,
at talking.
Yeah, lots of people are better at talking. All right, let's go to the next
So
PowerPoint.
I'm doing this. I'll talk to myself.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
my daughter will come out. My daughter is with me, and she'll come out and say, "Well, Dad, who are you talking to?" And I'll just say,
And you'll say, I'm talking to a very smart person myself.
Well, see, all you got to do then is record it and write it down.
Okay. Well, John, I always like to tell people first drafts are never perfect. There's actually a wonderful writer who writes about writing. And in one of her books, she titles the second chapter, Shitty First Drafts. And by that, she means everyone writes something that needs to be improved when it's your very first draft.
Was that Anne Lamott?
As
Anne Lamott.
Anne Lamott, Lamott, yes, indeed. And so what we do is we've got our beginning, we've got our end, we've got everything in the middle, we've got our slice of life. Now we're going to set it aside for a day or so, at least 24 hours, and then go back and begin reading it again. And one of the best writing exercises I ever had came in a history class that I took at college. The professor said, you must write a term paper, but it cannot be more than 3 1/2 pages long. I expect your bibliography to be just about as long. And John, my first draft on that, it was all about Abraham Lincoln, was 52 pages long. By the time I cut it down to 3 1/2 pages, I had learned more than anyone else ever taught me before or since on figuring out how to cut out extra words and how to make my writing tighter. And I want you to know, I still have that term paper. I keep it in my file, and I earned an A.
all right.
If you notice, I say here, number 2, use a strange eyeball. And by that, I mean, if you have someone you know who could give you a really good critique, which might or might not be your daughter, someone else will see things that you won't see simply because you are so close to it. I've been meeting for 15 years with 2 other writers every Thursday from 7 to 9 in the morning we bring our writing, and we critique each other. And it's made a big difference, not only in how good our writing is, but since all of us are trying to make a living doing that, it's also helped us in selling our writing. So if you have someone, and if you work at it, you can probably find, a lot of times you can find a writers group in your local library. One of the key things is to cut out extra words in your writing. And in your first draft, you will have more words than you need. I also tell people that when you are reading that first draft, read it out loud. And here's why. Our ears are very good editors. I've given workshops for business people, grammar for business professionals. And that's because, as one manager said to me, well, a lot of us slept through sixth grade grammar. So I tell people, if you read out loud, here's what happens. Your ears, you may not remember the grammar rule, and that doesn't matter. But your ears will tell you if something sounds not quite right, and you can take a look and make the necessary change. Or if you find as you read out loud, you have to take a breath in the middle of your sentence is too long. Most sentences should be no longer than 18 words. Okay? So these are tools that you can use in perfecting the first draft that you have made until you come to a place where you feel comfortable. Hey, this is what I want to show. All right. I believe that takes us through the
final finale here.
Okay, the finale, John. Yes. Show, don't tell. That's almost a cliche. Every writing teacher in the book will say, hey, you don't want to just tell people, you want to show them. Well, what does this mean? It means that if I'm trying to write about how scared I was before I went down that Black Diamond ski slope, I would say, oh, I had butterflies in my tummy. My mouth was dry. I was forgetting to breathe. My palms were wet. All of these are showing what my fear looked like. And it makes it a lot more powerful to the reader than to simply say, I was afraid. Details matter. The fiction editor of the New Yorker magazine once said, to write, all you have to do is remember the slam of your childhood screen door. John, think about that sentence. Did you immediately have a thought about a childhood door in your home when you were a kid? And what it might have sounded like when you slammed it shut? I think if we had, say, 30 people right here, and I said, all of you write about the slam of your childhood screen door, I can guarantee you every person writing would come up with a slightly different story. But the story would be full of details that matter. And I also say we need to use all of our senses when we're writing. I don't do this automatically. I have to ask myself when I'm in a second or a third draft, all right, I've told the reader what I see in this story, in this memoir, but what sounds were there? What touches were there? What was the feel of a rough wooden desk, for instance? What tasted my writing where I used to have pancakes with my grandma? What did they taste like? What were some of the feelings that I had? These are the ways that we make our memoir even stronger than when we have the first draft. But, John, most of all, what matters is saying, I'd like to write my story. I'd like to share this with my daughter. And then you can simply say, okay, I've heard some ways to do it. I've had some Barbara and Diane have given me some ideas. Now I just have to begin. And John, you asked, okay, what if I go online? Will I find some ways of helping me get started on that memoir writing? Absolutely. So I encourage you to do that. Are there any questions that you want to ask us now before we finish our hour?
Your jobs right now, what you want to do is try to help somebody in the direction and eventually start writing. Now, I'm thinking that, have you ever, okay, come across somebody, and I understand it's like a lot of things. Well, everybody can write, okay, or everybody has a life, and you think about it and you can write it down.
You can
But
write something. That's right.
at the end of this, do you ever find somebody that is terrible? It just isn't any good.
Well,
You're not
guess what?
doing
We all are in the beginning.
Yes.
And that's
yes.
why we all need editors, John. We all find someone, and I don't know where you are. There might be a library, there might be a writers group, there might be, we have a group here called the Writers Place.
Okay.
But once you get down your initial thoughts in whichever direction you want to take it, you can get an editor, somebody you can hire to look at what you've done and to kind of clean up your language or whatever you need to do. So it doesn't, you don't have to go get published, by a publisher. In today's world, if you do want to write something that you can hand out to your family or friends and or even if you want to just be published, it's very easy now to go on Amazon.
Oh, they will tell you.
Amazon has, if you go into Amazon and put in create space, the words create space, that is their independent publishing arm that will walk you through step by step how you can get whatever you've written into the right format for them to produce it in a book, form, like a paperback book, or sometimes hard, but usually it's a paperback book. And what they have now is what they call a print on demand function.
Yes.
And what that means is that in the old days, if you wanted to self-publish, they used to call it vanity press. Now everybody's self-publishing today. But if you wanted to self-publish, you had to order like 100 books or something, and they sat, in your garage until you could get rid of them. But in today's world, you can do what's called print on demand. So if you wanted to just do it for yourself and your family, you could just order the number of copies that you wanted to hand out to them. If you wanted to, clean it up enough to sell it, then you can put it on Amazon and people could order it one at a time. You don't make a lot of money doing this, but at least it's a way to get it done. And Create Space will provide you with an editor. So you'll pay a small fee, of course, but they will help you through that process. So that's just one way to do it. There are several.
And it's an excellent way. Okay, John, anything more? Any more information that we can give you?
But we're not talking about necessarily getting anything published.
No,
Just-
Right, no, it can just be for your family.
We just want to do like what you said in the beginning, write a memoir,
Mhm.
and whatever that may be for that, or at least myself, that's what it'll be.
Yes.
And I'll just that would be interesting. I'll just give it to my my daughters and see what
Sure.
they think about it, and maybe I might just want to keep it to myself and put it away somewhere, and they'll find it after I'm gone. I don't know.
That'd be a surprise.
And John, I promise you that if you sit down every day for just as little as 10 minutes
All right.
and say you're going to write some memory that pops into your head, you're just going to write about it for 10 minutes, but then you do it 5 days a week, it'll be amazing to you how much comes to you and how much easier it is each day to come up with that memory and to write it.
Right. Also, you can imagine, John, if your father could have written down some of his memories from his childhood, and you found them today, right? What a blessing that would be. Just before my father died, for many, many years, he would not talk about World War II. He wouldn't utter a word about it. And then somewhere in my midlife, he started talking about it, but nobody ever captured any of it, and he didn't tell us a lot of detail. So toward the end of his life, I literally sat down and interviewed him and had very specific questions about what happened there. Did he make friends there? What? And the stories that came out that we had never heard. I recorded him, and then I made a transcript out of those recordings. So there are many ways to do it, but preserving memories for your children is a real blessing to them.
Yes,
So,
it is. And it's something uniquely you. You
Right.
are the only
One
one
who knows,
who
yeah.
can do it.
Right.
Thank you, John, for being with us. We thoroughly enjoyed it. And we'd be happy to come back again online.
I got to tell you,
Uh,
on my end, I feel like I'm a privileged person. I'm the only one you're talking to. There's nobody else here. I feel kind of strange about this.
You're special.
Yeah, I'm special, all right.
Well, that's all right, John. You're also our guinea pig because we're practicing doing this online. We're used to doing these things live. So you also were a gift to us in that we didn't have to worry about a big audience. We could just talk to you.
And John, this is
Yeah.
Ellen again. I'm going to record it so you can have it for posterity. I'll send it to Anne Marie,
Yeah, okay.
and that way you can refer back to what information you were given.
Okay,
And
sure.
that way she can actually pass it along to the ones that were ill that couldn't make it.
All right.
Great.
Um,
Good luck, John, with writing and recording your memories.
Just real quick, I did not know I was going to be talking to anybody live on the computer. She did not tell me.
Ah,
I thought it was somebody coming in personally and talking to us.
oh.
But it
You
worked
all
out,
have
didn't
done
it?
It worked.
a good
Yeah.
job.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. It was a lot of information.
Yeah.
I'm trying to write what I can down.
Well, that's what I
That's why
said.
we're recording, yeah.
I will send Anne Marie the recording. And
All right.
So you can
And-
listen to it again.
Okay. Thank you
all
very much.
right. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you, John.
All right.
Diane,
Bye.
Barbara.
Bye.
Bye.